Recording in progress.
Hello, my vast YouTube army. Today I'm going to do probably one of my least requested things, which is to continue my crawl through my shelves in alphabetical order, and just discuss what's there. But interesting points arise sometimes. I'm going to start with variety of news though, so there is some eye candy. So one thing is to say that this um, alternative edition of the book that wouldn't burn has come out from the locked library. You can see at the start of the cover has a different set of colors, and then the end of the papers are all done up like a library, and on the inside, whoops, we've got these end papers that all the books there are, the titles come from uh, books that are mentioned in the epigraphs at the top of each chapter. Unfortunately, this is subscription only, and the moment to have it is past. The locked library is a thing that Voyager run, and it's mainly on Instagram. And you get a book every month, and they're all fancy ones. I think they're all Voyager titles. And I just wasn't allowed to tell you that for some reason that this existed. I guess it spoils the surprise for the people who are subscribed, but it then meant that none of the people who wanted it could get in on that. So the Broken Binding will be doing a special edition with a sprayed edge and a numbered and signed. So that will be going up on their site for pre-order, I think on April the 30th or possibly 31st if there's 31 days. And of course, the signed page in America, so the Broken Binding is UK based. The signed page in America are doing standard edition, but they're doing a colossal art card. So the art from the cover without the words and whatnot is going to be on one of these high quality, largish cards. This is one that the Underwriter Books did in the UK for the Book of the Ice. They did a series. So um, the signed page are doing something similar in the US. And you can order these back and forth, so you can get the Broken Binding one in the US and you can get the signed page one in the UK. But because it costs so very much to send books across the ocean, um, it's a lot cheaper to order from one that's close to you. Okay, so I'm also I'm going to move you here, working on this surprisingly difficult uh, jigsaw puzzle. Let me see down there of the cover art. I've been pecking away at that for a while. I think I've got some issues with the numbers of pieces in the sides, which need to resolve. I made two of those for. I was going to do a cover reveal, which involved sending some jigsaws to bloggers and letting them piece it together, and then the first one who got it could do the cover reveal. And I thought that was a pretty good idea, but Voyager did a graphic instead and wanted to do the reveal on their Twitter. So that happened, and now I've got two of these jigsaws. When I finish that one, I'm going to put it back in the box, and then I'll give away both of them, probably one on my social media and one on my Patreon. But they're fun, and they're quite difficult because there is quite a lot of repetition in the artwork. And the other thing is this. I've decided to start a sealed terrarium. I was inspired by a guy who set his up in the 60s, put a cork in the top, and it hasn't been opened for 50 years or so. And I thought that was quite fun. So I'm going to have a little garden in my office in there and watch it grow or die and decompose. We'll find out. And the final thing is the SPFBO is in its closing stages. I think there's about 2 weeks left to go, and about 75% of the scores are in, and we've got quite a tight packed leaderboard with plenty of room for changing of the lead. The lead did change just a few days ago. I think it's now Small Miracles in the first place, and Song of the Void in second, and that reversed, and then the ones below have a chance to actually overtake if they get some good scores. And every year we do the SPFBO, we get a few dropouts from the bloggers just because it's hard work, and they often want to break. This year, I think we've only had one, and that's the lowest number ever of dropouts, and that's the Fantasy Inn. So thank you very much to them for their sterling work. We all should give them a big thanks because it's an awful lot of work, and they're doing it unpaid just to help out self-published fantasy authors. And the big news is that they are being replaced by Dr. Philip Chase, Dr. Fantasy, a YouTuber with 10 times my following, or maybe even 15 times my following, who does a much better job at this than I do, and is going to showcase the books assigned to him on YouTube, and then much like Bookborn has this year, she's coming back. They're all coming back apart from Fancy. Okay, so that's it. Let's just do a quick dive into these shelves. Because I found a bunch more early books and stuffed them in my A section and B section, everything's shifted along a bit. So the third shelf, actually until about halfway along, is all stuff that used to be on the second shelf. So I've covered it. So I'm going to skip really quickly through the first few on these because they're in an earlier video, and then focus on the ones we haven't seen before. So there's the shelf in question, and this is the closer look. So I've already talked about these in an earlier video, and this is finishing off the Peter V. Brett's Quintology. That one's an arc of the core, and yeah, these were a fine story. I don't tend to stick with long series because I'm such a slow reader. I like to swap, read a first book and then swap to something else, so I get exposed to a greater variety of writing. So it has to be a particularly good reason for me to move on to book two and follow through. I do occasionally, and in this case, a whole variety of factors, including how much I enjoyed book one, but also that I'd met Peter V. Brett several times, and he's a nice guy, and I sort of just had a personal interest in his writing. And I think the thing with series for me is a lot of them, especially the longer ones, the quality will just decline, because that wonderful idea that started them off gets used and it just loses some of its power. And some series just jump the shark. You'll be watching a series on TV or whatever, and you'll get to sort of season 5, and then season 6 is just a disaster. That wasn't the case here. I feel it was more of a steady, on my part, waning of interest as the books got fatter and the cast list got larger and larger. But they were still enjoyable, good books that I had fun with. Then we've got all of these graphic novels by the Browns, Holman Nimue, have I said that right? Brown. And I've spoken about those before, but I do have a soft spot for his artwork, and again, he's someone that interacted with me early on in my writing career. So the ones we haven't discussed, I feel, are the Seas, which is the first 6 books here. I think are all by Orson Scott Card. I didn't buy any of these; they're just on my shelves. My wife must have brought them into the house. I read this one a long time ago, like 30 years ago, Capitol, and that's sort of standalone sci-fi. I've never heard of Card before. I just picked up and I enjoyed it. It was really pretty good. On Goodreads, that has 373 ratings, and there's a direct relationship between the number of ratings a book has on Goodreads and the number of sales it's made. If they're fairly modern books, then that's a fairly strict ratio. Right now, it tends to be about 4, maybe 10 years ago, it tended to be about 8. You can just multiply the number of sales by 4 or 8, sorry, number of ratings, and get the number of sales. I've got a blog on this on my blog site with loads of data and graphs and whatnot. But for books that were published in the 70s, then if you've got 100 ratings on them, they could have sold, 1,000 times that for all I know back then. The point with Capital is it's got 373 ratings, and his famous one, Ender's Game here, has 1.3 million. So you can see that almost no one, less than a percent, some quarter of a percent maybe, of the readers of this book thought out his other work and went and read this one. Which is a bit sad, really, because if you loved somebody's book and they wrote other sci-fi books, and it was a sci-fi book you love, why not go and find out what else they've written? If you are a swift reader, an avid reader, you consume a lot. Obviously, for me, I am more in the school of, oh yes, I'll just read Ender's Game and that's it. And I'll move on and find someone else. That's because I'm such a slow reader. I really like 10 books a year is probably average. I wouldn't want to spend like 60% of that on one author reading all of these. But I did read all of these back in the day, with diminishing returns, but sort of, I think that Speaker for the Dead was the next one in this Ender's Game series, and then he revisits some of the other characters. Ender's Shadow is about this guy called Bean, and I think I've probably and Xenocide. I think I probably petered out around about Shadow Puppets when my interest was waning. There's a lot of bad feeling about Card online because of his views on homosexuality, which I totally don't agree with and wasn't aware of when I read these. But yeah, I'm interested in what's on the page. What's on the page is a very entertaining for me story. Ender's Game. Um, what else have we got? So we move on into The Girl with All the Gifts, which is an excellent book and very easily spoiled. So I really won't say anything about it other than I hugely enjoyed it. By M.R. Carey. He's got a follow up of some sort. I don't think it's tightly coupled, but it's called The Boy on the Bridge, which I should read. And they made a film out of this, which is also a very good film, I thought. And I enjoyed that. Rather weird, not read. I have I said something about it here. Um, Maybe I have. Don't know anything about it. The Trudy Canavan series. I don't think this is all. It might be a trilogy, but I think maybe there are more books in it. I read the first one, which was Magician's Guild a couple of years ago. Um, it's not badly written. I think the book was written 20 years ago, and if it had been written 40 years ago and I'd read it then I would have been a big fan. But it just felt a bit generic to me because there's been so much similar since. And the excitement levels were a bit low. It really wasn't my cup of tea, but it does have a dedicated following, and obviously my wife felt interested enough, invested enough to buy some more of the series. I don't think I'll be following that though. Then we've got these two books I've not read by what's his name, Lou something Caro, um, Leo Carew, The Wolf and the Spider. Came out about 5 years ago. Books one and two in a series. Not read them. There should be about here The Way of Eden by Philip Chase, who I just mentioned, or The Way of Eden, which came to me as a great big floppy A4 printout with some binding. It just doesn't fit on the shelves. But I do plan to get a copy of the paperback and slot it in there in due course. And then there's Seraphina's Lament by Sarah Chorn. And so I get sent a lot of books, and sometimes it's by people I know. I know Sarah, I've known her for like 10 years or more online. And she does a lot of good things. And she was the first person to help me out with the SPFBO. And generally speaking, if somebody sends me a book and I don't get on with it, then I just never mention it again. Because, if I've got an insufficient number of nice things to say about it, or I couldn't get myself to the end of it, then why say anything at all? It's here on my shelf, so I will say that I didn't get to the end of it. And that's just a personal thing that obviously different people's writing connects with different people. We all have different tastes, and just because you don't like curry doesn't mean that curry's not good. Um, in this case, felt something similar with Janny Wirtz, who I read the Shadow of the no, the Curse of the Mist Wraith, and she's a writer who has a big following for her prose. So thousands of people consider her prose to be excellent and want to dive into it. Um, and I think I wrote in the review of Janny's book that I could see that it was skillfully crafted. It's like me going into a jazz club and listening to the best jazz player in the entire world. Still wouldn't like jazz because I just don't like jazz. And the style of the writing, a very particular style, and it didn't mesh with me. And I think it's the same with Sarah. And Sarah also had a big following for her prose, which has a strong character to it. And give it a try. If it works for you, then I think it will really work. Um, we've got two books there in a series. What are they called? The Return of the Dowd and The Corroded Man by Adam Christopher. Not read them. But here we have Piranesi by Susanna Clark. And I did read that. I read that last year. I picked it up because I had watched the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell series on TV and really liked that. So rather than read that book, which I then kind of knew the story of, I picked this one up. Um, I didn't like it as much as everyone else seems to be. I think I gave it a 3 star on Goodreads, and typically I would not give any book a 3 star unless it was from a massively popular author who just wouldn't give the slightest damn whether I liked it or not. Um, Typically, I would just either not give it stars or just not talk about it at all. But I could see in this book that the prose was excellent. You know, she's a really good writer, and the idea was excellent. I just it didn't enthrall me, and the story didn't sort of go in the direction that I was hoping it would. And I was just a little bit underwhelmed. But lots of people like it. It's got really good ratings and hundreds of thousands of ratings too. So it's done really well, and I encourage you to give it a shot. Um, Ready Player One, I loved. It's a book where I say I know why I loved it because it's set in the 80s around ideas to do with sort of nerd culture, video games and D&D. And I was a teenager in the 80s and I was heavily into D&D and playing video games in arcades. So all of the little minute details and things resonated with me, and I really enjoyed it. I'm less sure why it was so wildly popular, but I'm glad it was. It's got a follow-up, Ready Player 2, which is been rather poorly received. I think came out about 10 years later. And that one, so the Ready Player One had a 4.23 rating on Goodreads, which is a very good rating, especially when you've got hundreds of thousands of ratings, because there's a thing called the Goodreads droop, where many books, when a book first comes out, it's rated by friends and family and enthusiasts, people who you know, were heavily attracted to this book just in its own right, maybe because of the author or the cover art or whatever, but they went in fully enthusiastic. So you get a high score. You'll see many books with sort of 20 ratings or 50 ratings, and they'll be almost 5. But the Goodreads droop is when, as a book succeeds, if it does succeed and draws in more and more readers, those readers owe less and less to the author, and they are often just drawn in because a friend has said, this is good, or because it's become so popular, they want to see what the fuss is about, and they may no longer be dead in the crosshairs of the author's demographic. And what happens is they tend to give lower and lower ratings. So over the first 1,000 ratings, if you get 1,000, you will see a rapid drop in your average rating. and over the first 10,000 ratings, that drop will continue, but much slower. And even between 10,000 and 50,000, say, you will see a couple of so it goes like, instead of being 4.22, it might go to 4.21 and then 4.20 over that. Those are tens of thousands that are coming in later. And then eventually it sort of stabilizes. Very rarely to see a book with 100,000 ratings change its rating. But if you maintain a score above 4 once you're past 10,000 ratings, that's a really good book. And if you maintain a score above 4.5, which is almost impossible with hundreds of thousands of ratings, then that is, well, I say a really good book. It's a book that everyone seems to love. It's just people's opinions. There's no objective good. And it varies with the type of book as well. And the sort of let's say young adult books tend to have a higher rating because with a younger demographic, these tend to be the early fantasy books that people have read, and they're more wowed by ideas that later they'll become a bit jaded and less impressed with. And the more intellectual a book is, the more literary it is, so that demographic, for whatever reason, just tends to like to rate lower. Um, but as a general thing, so that what was it? Did I say 4.23 for book one was amazing with to have that after so many ratings, and book two has a 3.43, which is a pretty low rating for a book. Yeah, any book that really falls below about 3.5, that's on Goodreads, that's a pretty low rating. Doesn't mean it's not a book that many people will love. It just means that a lot of the people who read it didn't love it. And then finally, we've got here Seeds of Earth, and this one's called, appropriately, it's Hidden in the Shadow, and it's called Shadow Kings, and they're both by the same author, who is Michael Cobley, written 14 and 22 years ago, respectively, sci-fi and fantasy, respectively. I've not read them. Their ratings are pretty low, 4.4, 3.42 and 3.14, respectively. So there you have it. I will probably rambled on for far too long, so I'm going to leave it there. Catch you next time. I'm going to stop this as soon as I find the button that stopped the damn thing.